Segment number 1. So, Traveling Wilburys Volume 1, in the opening montage, you heard a clip from Handle with Care, and now you're going to hear a clip from Not Alone Anymore.
You're not alone. I'll see you through the rain. Through the heartache and pain. It hurts like never before. You're not alone anymore.
All right, it's the first time we're covering the Traveling Wilburys. I'll run some numbers here. This their Volume 1 comes in at number 119 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 13 in 1988, number 794 of all time. It is the Traveling Wilburys' highest-rated album on Best Ever Albums. It did not make Rolling Stone's list, and the Traveling Wilburys have ranked number 665 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. So, a little history of the band and this record. This is one of 2 albums that the Traveling Wilburys did. It was recorded from April to May of 1988 and released on October 25th, 1988. And originally the idea for this, so this is, we're talking of supergroups, obviously this is a supergroup. Let's see, I'm sure John can. I'm curious, Josh, can you name all of the Traveling Wilburys members?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Do you want me to do it now?
Sure.
George Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Dylan.
Yeah.
Jeff Flynn, Tom Petty, and Roy Orbison.
Very good. There
Well
you
done,
go.
Josh.
All right. Can you guess who is the mastermind of this band?
This is the George Harrison show, from what I remember, right?
Yeah, I would.
Yes.
Think that's my.
Yes,
Yep.
it's George Harrison. So the original idea of the possible idea of creating this type of band started during the recording sessions for George Harrison's album Cloud 9, which I guess they were recording that in January of 1987. Jeff Lynne was producing the record, and he and Harrison were talking.
Yep.
Fun to do an album with some friends, quasi supergroup. They had discussed other members. Bob Dylan was suggested by Harrison, and Jeff Lynne had suggested Roy Orbison. But it was just kind of like talk. There was no real serious venture to really get that going. So it was just kind of. But that's the original idea. Started around that time.
I actually listened to Cloud 9 this week.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because I just thought, when I saw George Harrison, I saw that we had listened to a solo album in a while, and so I listened to that because it's got My Mind Set on You as one of the singles, and
yes,
it's pretty good.
Yeah,
that was a video too of him sitting in a study, I think, with like random animals.
That's a good video. Yep. So he's recording that record. And so around the same time, Bob Dylan, this is not a good time. The late 80s, generally speaking, mid-late 80s, not a good time for Bob Dylan. Artistically and commercially, it's kind of at the lowest point of his career, perhaps. Petty had become friendly with George Harrison and Jeff Lynne in 1987, around the time that they were also, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers were touring as Bob Dylan's backing group. And Jeff Lynne had also started collaborating with Tom Petty for his album Full Moon Fever, which we're going to cover soon because that comes out the year later. Mm-hmm. And Jeff Lynne was also working with Roy Orbison for his album Mystery Girl, which has the song "You Got It." Remember that Roy Orbison song that kind of reestablished him as well. So there's all these guys that know each other. They've been working with each other here and there.
Can I throw in something real quick, Matt, while you're there?
Mm-hmm.
I never even processed "You Got It" as like a song from 19. It seems like it's from like 1959, and so when you said that,
That's
I was like,
point.
oh shit! I thought it was just him redoing a song they did in like 1959. So
yep, nope, that's from right around this time. He's with Jeff Lynne. So they really the actual formation of the band started coming together in April of 1988. George Harrison's in L.A. He's overseeing the filming because don't forget this. George Harrison was a producer, a film producer, and he had a production company called Handmade Films, and so they were working on a film called Checking Out. Josh, have you ever seen the movie Checking Out with Jeff Daniels?
Not.
No, Jeff Daniels in the film. Yep. So Harrison's in L.A. checking that out, and the record company, his record company, which was Warner Brothers, asked him for basically essentially to do kind of like a B-side to one of the singles from Cloud 9 that they were going to be releasing in the UK, I believe, called This Is Love.
It does seem like George Harrison's film company would do a movie from Jeff Daniels, though, does it? It does seem like that is what they would finance. So, like, nothing about that seems unusual.
Yeah.
So,
well, they were that, and this is the other thing too. One of the other things that bonded all these guys together, all 5 of them, like everybody loved Monty Python, and so they would like quote Monty Python lyrics. Yeah, they were. That was something that brought them together. And I think Harrison had some work. He worked with some of the Monty Python guys as well. So. So the record company's
not like
asking,
a love of like hobos and minstrel shows, or so. That's what I always imagined the vibe was. But
maybe
no.
they threw that in there too.
Trains.
Train. Snake
oil salesman. Yeah.
So the record company wants Harrison to do another song, and he ends up having dinner with Jeff Lynne and Roy Orbison one night, and he was talking to them about, I need to do this song. So Harrison asks Lynne to help him record the track that he had started working on, and they also invited Roy Orbison along. And so because they were going to work on this last minute, to find a recording studio, they just basically called up Bob Dylan to see if they could use his studio in his garage in Malibu. And so Dylan's like, yeah, that's fine. So they go over to Dylan's house the next day to start working and recording this song. Before stopping by there, George Harrison goes by Tom Petty's house because apparently he had one of his guitars at Petty's house that he wanted to use. So he stops by Tom Petty's house to pick up his guitar, and in that when he's there, he invites Tom Petty to come along. And the 5 of them, basically, Bob Dylan cooks a barbecue. The rest of them kind of hang out in the garage, and they put together the pieces of the song that would become Handle with Care. The title of the song came from a sticker that was on a box in Dylan's garage. So they just say, okay, we're going to call it Handle with Care.
Can you even imagine? Just guys hanging out.
Just hanging out.
I'm just trying to
Some
think
of
of
the
Bob
most famous
Dylan working a bar, like a grill with like his glasses on and like his Greenwich Village Bob Dylan like on the grill and stuff.
Hey, who wants a hot dog? Hey,
hey, hot dogs coming on the side of the road with buns and birds.
So they do this song together. They have a great time. And they're all friends, right? And they're all really big fans of each other. So they give the song to the label, and the label's like, you know what, the song is actually way too good to put as a B-side. So they're like, maybe we should just release it on its own. And throughout this whole process, essentially everybody decides that, maybe we should just do an album, like cut an album as a band together. So
now, if that had stayed a B-side, what were the chances that like the Ringer would release it as the best B-side you've never heard of, an oral history of Handle with Care? That would have been written right in 2023.
For sure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they decide they figure out they really only had 10 days to record because of the touring schedule that Bob Dylan was about to start. Also, Roy Orbison had a touring dates to get going. Incidentally, this was the tour Bob Dylan's tour started in June of that year. It was called the Never Ending Tour, and this tour is still happening today. So the tour that it's the same tour. I mean, I'm sure
it's got to be a Guinness record or something.
It's up there, but he still takes breaks. It's not like he's touring every day. I don't think anyway, actually. I'm just assuming. I mean, he's taking breaks, but he keeps touring under that name.
So they only had 10 days to record the whole album?
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Jesus,
So they decide to call the band the Wilburys is a term that actually Jeff Lynne and George Harrison came up with in the recording of Cloud 9. And it was basically as a reference to any mistakes that were happening, that were part of the recording, mistakes that were happening. And George Harrison will just say, we'll bury them in the mix. We'll bury that in the mix. So we'll bury. So that becomes the name of the band. And they essentially decide, you know what, the idea is let's write and record a song a day, basically. So that's what they do. Wow. They go to Dave Stewart's house to start working on this. So Dave Stewart from the Eurythmics, I guess, allows them to go. So they really makeshift studio here. They're in the kitchen with microphones and stuff like that, and they're just figuring out songs on acoustic guitars. And George Harrison's kind of auditioning all the different, everybody's singing leads on the different songs, and George Harrison is picking out which one sounds the best for that particular song.
So he like definitely kind of the leader of this group?
Yeah, they all, I mean, all of them share writing credits really, but there's but but Tom Petty later said it's, we are all equal partners, but this is really, it's George Harrison was
He's
the
like
leader
the
of the band.
orchestrator. Yeah.
Exactly. Yes.
Got it.
So 10 days, and they're at Dave Stewart's house. And so they were very pleasant sessions. They all, indicated that they were in awe of each other, and they had primary songwriters, but they all contributed either lyrically or musically. So Harrison, and then after they do the recording, Harrison and Lynn travel to London to finish the production and mixing of the record. And Warner Brothers worked out arrangements because all these guys are signed to different labels, right? So they're trying to figure out, which label is going to release this. So they essentially had the record companies work out a deal to be able to release it. In the liner notes of the album, none of the actual names, the real names of these guys are mentioned. They all went under pseudonyms, and they were all Wilburys themselves. So they were basically children of the fictional character Charles Truscott Wilbury Sr. So George Harrison is referred to as Nelson Wilbury. Jeff Lynne is Otis Wilbury. Roy Orbison is Lefty Wilbury. Tom Petty is Charlie T. Jr. Wilbury. And they had a drummer on here, Jim Keltner. He plays drums on a lot of these songs, and he's not a Wilbury, but he's dubbed Buster Sidebury. So there you go. So that's so none of their actual names are on the record. And Jeff Lynne had this quote saying about the songwriting process, quote, "We would arrive at about 12 or 1 o'clock and have some coffee. Someone would say, 'What about this?' and start on a riff. Then we'd all join in, and it would turn into something. We'd finish around midnight and just sit for a bit while Roy would tell us fabulous stories about Sun Records or hanging out with Elvis. Then we'd come back to the next day and work on another one. That's why the songs are so good and fresh, because they haven't been second-guessed and dissected and replaced. It's so tempting to add stuff to a song when you've got unlimited time." I thought that was kind of an interesting quote about, songwriting process and how people put albums together. So the record was released on October 25th, 1988. It sold pretty well, reaching number 3 in the U.S. and 16 in the U.K., eventually being certified triple platinum. It won a Grammy in 1990 for Best Rock Performance by a Group or Duo, and was nominated for Album of the Year, which was also competing against Tom Petty's Full Moon Fever. But both of them lost out to an album I think we're covering in a couple weeks, Bonnie Raitt's Nick of Time. That won Album of the Year in that year. Couple of postscripts here I'll do before our takes. Sadly, actually, later on in the year, on December 6th, not even 2 months after the album was released, Roy Orbison died of a heart attack at the age of 52.
Jeez.
Which is...
Gosh, I did not
I
think
can't
he was
believe
that young.
he was.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
it
agree.
sounds like he was ancient.
Guys,
Yeah.
I am 7 years. I am 7 years. In
honestly-
7 years, I'll be 52. Okay.
I honestly, and you look only like at least 5 or 7 years younger than Roy Orbison.
Thank you, John.
But I would have guessed, Matt, if you had asked me how old Roy Orbison was when he died, I would have honestly guessed like
Right.
70.
Yeah.
Like
50,
I don't know if I've ever
52.
mismatched an age in a thing as much.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
How
yeah.
old? I mean, they all kind of always seemed old to me. Maybe except Tom Petty.
Well,
But,
like Bob Dylan had to be in his late 40s.
Well, I know
Would be my
George
guess.
Harrison was born in like 1943.
Right.
Right. So,
So
I
he
mean,
would have been
he's like 40.
mid-40s.
He's my age in this album. He's 45 when he did this record. Yeah. And Tom
Yeah,
Petty
that-
is younger. Dylan
Yeah.
and Lynn are probably
Tom Petty's
roughly
probably
similar.
what, like late 30s, I'd say,
Yeah,
or maybe
yeah.
even mid 30s.
Yeah.
Yeah, like everybody else makes sense in terms of their age. Roy Orbison does not.
Yeah.
Make, he
I
seems
agree.
infinitely older
He
than
does.
them
I
than just
agree.
like one decade. Yeah.
Yeah. So they did do a couple videos. They did a video with all of them with Handle with Care. They did a video after Orbison died for the end of the line, and that included a rocking chair. They're like on a train or something, and when Roy Orbison's part came up, it was just a rocking chair moving back and forth with his guitar on. So that was kind of the homage to him. The band did Come Together, the four of them. Go
Wasn't
ahead.
there a video where there was like a hologram of him in it at one point? Was that the end of the line?
I don't recall that.
okay.
Did they do holograms in 1988?
I feel like there's one of their videos like had like an outline or like a hologram. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just imagining that in my mind.
I don't think he was in the video. He was in the video for Handle with Care, and he was just represented by an empty rocking chair with a guitar in it.
Yeah.
But the other four surviving members did release the second album, which was called Volume 3, just because George Harrison likes to be quirky. So
Cheeky
volume 3,
monkey.
cheeky monkey. There was talk of a tour. Tom Petty he said that he was on his knees begging George Harrison to do a tour, but Harrison kind of didn't really want to do that. He thought about it, but it just never came to fruition. Both of the albums actually went out of print for a period of time in the late 90s and early 2000s, but they were finally released together in 2007 as the Traveling Wilburys collection, which includes both of the albums and a 25-minute documentary of the creation of the band and their first record, which you can find on YouTube if you want to check that out. And since then, that was basically it. They did those 2 albums, and that was it for the band. George Harrison died on November 29th, 2001 from lung cancer. He was 58, still very, very young. Tom Petty, of course, died on October 2nd, 2017 of an accidental drug overdose at the age of 66. And Bob Dylan continues to tour and make albums and keep plugging along. His last
Jeff Lynne's
record,
still alive too, right?
yeah. Dylan's last record was in 2020, Rough and Rowdy Ways. And Jeff Lynne still performs, releases music, produces, does everything. His last album was 2019's From Out of Nowhere under the band Jeff Lynne's ELO, not ELO, Jeff Lynne's ELO. So there you go. So that's the bio on the Traveling Wilburys, and we'll start our reactions today with Josh. What do you think of Volume 1 here by the Traveling Wilburys?
Well, I mean, this is a super group. This is like what you should consider, not whatever Damn Yankees is, but like this is how you make. This is what you do when you have artists that are, at the top of their game and can just throw an album together and it sounds awesome. And it's like so listenable and easy and fun to listen to, and it amazingly also like kind of highlights each of the artists and like what makes them special. I feel like we talked about Roy Orbison being feeling like from another time period, but
Yeah.
they fit him in really well, and they use his voice. He has such kind of a unique singular voice that and they put him here on choruses and have him sing lead on some of the songs, and it works really well, like on Not Alone Anymore, and even in the opening track when he's singing with Harrison on Handle with Care. And I like, one of the fun parts about this album is, well, would anybody listen to this album not knowing who the Wilburys were? Because that would be like kind of a crazy experiment. Like, just
What do you mean?
put
Like
on-
they did?
I
Like they didn't
this
put
guy,
2 and 2
this guy
together?
Yeah.
sounds like Tom Petty, or
Right.
like this guy sounds like George Harrison.
Yeah,
oh,
not
it's
knowing
amazing how much
they're
they said.
supergroup.
Yeah,
That would be fun. But the you can hear kind of like the Dylan craziness with Tweeter and the Monkey Man. That's kind of it feels like a Bob Dylan song, but
Yeah.
that's got a great chorus to it. I always like, you can pick out the Jeff Lynne kind of like ELO instrumentation at times too, like Heading for the Light, and there's like this certain, whatever he does with a keyboard or something, it's like such an ELO like thing, and when it's in here I can like pick it out. So knowing that,
Interesting
that
you
was
say
fun.
that, Josh, because I thought as soon as I heard Heading for the Light, knowing ELO now, I was like, that's an ELO song.
Yeah.
Actually, I learned that George Harrison is the main songwriter for that song,
Oh.
so which I found interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Well,
but it definitely sounds like an ELO song. I agree.
Yeah. And it's it incorporates, it's kind of got a country feel to it as well, this album, which I think works well. And overall, every song is pretty enjoyable and solid, and it's just a really fun listen. Obviously End of the Line's probably the most famous song on here. I knew that one, and I knew Handle with
I don't know.
Care.
Handle with Care is pretty.
Yeah, I
damn
think
big.
Handle with
Yeah,
Care
yeah.
is the
You think so? Okay. Well, I knew both. Those were definitely the standout singles. Or
What was the first one you said? I'm sorry.
End of the Line.
End of the Line. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And I don't know, they're just really good at what they do. So the lyrics are fun. Last Night has a really nice bouncy feel to it with cowbell, and there's some horns in it that they throw in. I think Orbison works really well for this. I feel like Tom Petty is the one that kind of gets short shrift in my opinion. I feel like he doesn't stand out as much. But I also like when they harmonize and when all of them are singing on the song. I think that's kind of a special thing. So overall, this is, this, I hadn't heard this album before. It's a really pleasant surprise. I mean, I expected, I don't know, expectations are one thing when you know who all the artists are on it, and so it was a little high, but I felt like it met my expectations and was just a really fun listen at like 35 minutes, and I could recommend this to anyone. So thumbs up for me.
Well, let me start with my favorite thing about this album. I don't know if there's a more fun song for me to sing along to than Handle with Care, because I get to do like all of my favorite impersonations of musicians, like all in the same. So like you start off with like the George Harrison like alliteration mixed with like the pronunciation of lyrics, like been beat up and battered round, been sent up and I've been shot down, like that. Then you get like full Roy Orbison, right? Like where like he goes, I'm so tired of being, like dragging it. So you got that, and then you get like both Tom Petty and Bob Dylan singing a harmony together at the thing. So you've got like full Tom Petty voice, like everybody, up there, and then you've got like Bob Dylan like doing a lazier voice, like everybody, like, and like you've got all these different like fucking, so it just cracks me up. And for some reason, like I remember my dad playing the song like all the time, and I could just always remember the part that always sticks out to me is that part where George Harrison goes at the end, like, oh, the sweet smell of success, like that song is so embedded in my skull for some reason when I was a kid, because this was on. So that's like number one that's there. And then you've got like multiple Bob Dylan songs, like Dirty World and Tweeter and the Monkey Man. Tweeter and the Monkey Man might be one of my favorite Bob Dylan songs ever, because it's like the most Bob Dylan song, like incomprehensible lyrics about like, I can't quite tell if the Monkey Man is actually female or if he's trying to like be transgressive. Like, I don't know what the heck was going on there, but it was a fun song to listen to, and I enjoyed it. So
do you know? So Tweeter and the Monkey Man. It's funny you say that.
It's supposed to be like Atlantic City by Bruce Springsteen, because it's
definitely they're trying he's trying to be Springsteen. It's an homage to Springsteen, because it's like word salad, and it's throwing in all these like Mansion on the Hill, Thunder Road. He's throwing all these like Springs and New Jersey.
That's
like
awesome
Jersey
that you
Girl.
say that, because it literally that's what I said. It's like Bob Dylan song, but like Bruce Springsteen themes mixed with. And remember how I used to always talk about like Springsteen would just be like lesser Bob Dylan, like, and I was like, oh my god, there's a song that actually is Bob Dylan imitating Bruce Springsteen
like
imitating Bob Dylan. And so it's so funny you say that, Matt, because you didn't have to tell me that. Like, I knew it. It's literally Atlantic City by Bruce Springsteen. Cut the Chicken Man or whatever died. Like, oh, they blew up the Chicken Man in Philly. Like, it's the same exact song, like lyrically. And then you've got like a Roy Orbison. So I think it's like Not Alone Anymore. Is that where Orbison's taking the lead on singing? And you've got like a song that sounds like a Beatles song, like Heading for the Light, which is like, that's like, the Beatles could have written that song, I feel like. And you've got this, but yeah, this album's awesome. Like, how can you not? I mean, it's basically, it is completely inoffensive in all the good ways, right? You've got like true craftsmen. You've got some of the best songwriters ever with some of the best and most distinguishable voices ever, which is why this song has endless singability for me, because you can just basically do karaoke on like four different, and Jeff Lynne not as much, but the other four guys are all four guys that you could absolutely try to sing like all the time. Ironically, actually, End of the Line, I don't dislike the song, but I actually think it's one of the weaker songs on the album compared to some of the other ones if I were ranking them. And weak is the wrong word. I would just say I like other ones better. But yeah, this is fantastic. I remember my dad had this one, and he had part 3, and then he told me that part 3 was actually part 2, and it was like a wink, right, and a nod that like they called. So like I remember like for a while I was like, why didn't you buy part 2, Dad? You bought part 1 and 3. It's like too shitty. And like then he clued me in kind of that no, that was something that they did on purpose. But,
it's Harrison.
Yeah,
goofing around. Yeah,
but yeah, I mean, come on, it's how can I'd be surprised that if anybody who likes rock music doesn't like this album. I mean, it appeals to anyone who likes pop rock, classic rock, folk rock. I mean, it's got like they're basically dabbling in all the different genres and in the lanes of the types of music that each of them write. And while they share common through lines, I'd say like classic rock and roll, right, is the one through line that like all of them sort of share. And it's sort of funneled through this with sort of a theme that's Americana, right? So I'm all for it, you know. And I know that like this is when supposedly Dylan was in his creative drought, but it's funny because he brings some of my favorite Dylan songs I've listened to in the time we've done it on this album. So they stand out actually for being enjoyable for me. So yeah, big thumbs up for me. I love this album.
And Orbison's kind of like this, I don't know, living legend at that time. I feel like he's such kind of a, like we said, he's like from another time.
Legend, yes.
Like from another time of music. I just kind of pair him at the same time as like Elvis or something, the way he sounds and like
exactly.
Because that's what he did.
Like,
I mean, that's
it's crazy.
That's what
he's
they
Elvis,
like,
but he's also like that like David Lynch era. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's like, what era is this from that David Lynch is pulling music from? That
I
seems
should
of
dress
another
up
era.
as
But
Roy Orbison for Halloween.
but that's what they did. They had.
Like,
Go ahead.
is like Roy Orbison blind or not? That was the other thing that I used to always remember because you always wear those glasses, right?
Yeah,
And like,
glasses. But that's what they did. They would do like a session and whatever, and then they hang out and be like, Roy, tell us about Elvis. Like, you know what I mean? They were just like, and that's the thing that, you know, I think at one point, you know, Harrison walked up to Dylan and was like, hey, just because you're Bob Dylan, don't think that like, you know, you're still an equal here. And Dylan said something to the effect of, hey, I'm in awe of you guys as much as you might be.
Well,
of
I
me
like
or
how the
whatever,
dude from the Beatles feels he has to tell Bob Dylan.
Yeah, Bob Dylan to chill out.
Right back
with
at
his
you, Chief.
ego.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Really, it should be Jeff Lynne who's the one going around doing that.
But you know what?
Right?
Credit to Jeff Lynne. This sound that you're hearing here, the production here is all Jeff Lynne. I mean, and that's what we're gonna hear that
he did all of their albums.
Yeah, and you're gonna hear that when you do the Tom Petty Full Moon Fever and
that George Harrison album. Like,
the
sounds
Cloud
like
Nine. I'm
this.
sure you're going to hear it on. I mean, there's a lot of hallmark elements of the Jeff Lynne sound on this record. You know,
Well, I think of that
production
Roy
he
Orbison
brings.
album from 1988 sounding like a Phil Spector album, which I'm sure is highly influential on how Jeff Lynne produced.
Sure.
Because I see elements of the wall of sound in Jeff Lynne's production. Just like I also I listened to thousands and thousands of hours of the Beatles in Jeff Lynne's music, which we talked about immediately when we did those two ELO albums.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I love this record. I never had it. I think my brother had it, and so a lot of these songs were very familiar. But I listened to this more intently, you know, this time around, and I agree with a lot of what you guys say. I mean, it's so solid, it's so brisk. It's just it ends, and you're like, that's it. Like it's like you know, one of the few albums you're like, holy crap, that just was over like that, you know. But I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I like the different voices. I like the different, you know, each voice is its own distinct kind of sound. And I agree. Roy Orbison, we didn't really ever cover him. I pulled up his info on
Wikipedia.
And his highest rated album actually is Mystery Girl from 1989, but and that was 420 in the 1980s. But the rest of them from like the 60s, you know, like early 60s is a lot of his stuff. So we never got to cover him. So I'm glad we're talking about him now because I love Roy Orbison's voice. It's a singular, amazing. It's one of the best voices I've ever heard. That's why I picked Not Alone Anymore to go into the segment. That song was, I feel like I didn't really know that song terribly well going into this, and he's so good. It's like, how do you sing like that? You know, he's got a great voice. I thought a couple of things
What did he do between like the 1960s and like the late 80s? Like, because he definitely, you said it, all his albums are in the early 60s, and then he's back here. Like, what did he do?
Well, the highest rated ones were, let me scroll through here, 60. He's got an album in 72. He's got an album in 80. Well, that's the greatest hits album. That doesn't count. Yeah, most of his albums in the top 10 are all in the 60s. There's a 92 album. Yeah, that's a good question, John. There's an 89 album. That's the live record. That doesn't count.
Yeah, because it's like he just disappeared for like 15 years, and it's like, oh.
You're right.
I'm also seeing, by the way, I just pulled this up, like looking at his Wikipedia. hilariously, like I see that like David Lynch wanted to use In Dreams for Blue Velvet, which
Yeah,
is
makes sense.
like I wasn't even aware of that, and I was like, I meant the David Lynch reference. I'm like, Jesus, we're starting to get good at this, aren't we, guys?
Yeah.
In terms of figuring out stuff.
Well,
Yeah.
it's like he was in his 20s when he released those albums in the 60s, and then like
Yeah, but he wasn't doing
was he
anything in the
doing?
80s or
Yeah.
the 70s and the early 80s. It's just that's a good question, but no, his voice, and he sounds great still. Like he hit the high notes that he hits on Not Alone Anymore is just flawless.
Yeah.
So really liked him. Rattled is a Creedence. So I'm like, that sounds like that's a Fogerty. I think that was mainly a Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty song, perhaps, but that was yeah, definitely sounded like Creedence. And I loved Last Night. That's a ska song. That's like one of my favorite ska type songs. I mean, the upbeat, the horns in the background. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys picked that up, but I'm like, that's like a ska type, like a slowed down type of ska, but still that nonetheless.
Yeah, it's a little like
but,
first gen.
Yeah. So yeah, I love this. This is like, and this is also like, I'm surprised John didn't make this comment, but I it's like a baby boomer's like best, wet dream here is like,
Right.
Yeah, but it's
you
like
put
all the
these
good
guys
shit
together.
of the baby boomers. They did make a lot
Right.
of good music. It's all the good shit without the bad
Yeah.
shit. Yeah.
No, it's a really focused record. It's really tight. It's got variety. It's, for not just musical styles, but the vocals. I love Tweeter and the Monkey Man is Dylan they're just like, all right, Bob, have at it, do your thing, and so it's great, and it's really sad that Orbison passed away. I don't know if they ever would have, I mean, they did another record after this. It's not, I don't know that one that well either, but I don't think it's I would be surprised if it was as good as this. I mean, there's no Roy Orbison, right? I mean, he's such a key component of this. You take him away, there's no way that you're going to do an album as good as this one if Roy Orbison is not singing in some of the songs. So yeah, nothing groundbreaking, but just really solid. The fact they did this in a week and a half and just let's just throw this together. It was on a whim. They just came together. Like even though the idea for the band had been talked about, it was never a serious thing. And for them just to kind of put this together, go into somebody's house, go to Dave Stewart's house in his kitchen, and bang out like 10 songs in 10 days, and then go tour and do whatever. It's it's amazing. They're great. So yeah, huge thumbs up. It's a great album.
Yep. Yeah, if you like any of these artists, you will like this album. I mean, if you like if you like music, you'll like this album in some form. So, thumbs up.
It's a universal thumbs up, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of an interesting album that it's like in the late 80s by folks that were popular in as early as the late 50s, 60s, and then you've got like Petty, who was there in the late 70s, and Jeff Lynne is also there right in the late 70s and 80s, and then so it's kind of like interesting that these people have been on our journey the entire way, and here they are being contemporary again, like in their 40s, right? But this is like the good shit that people do in their 40s, not the like nostalgia trip shit that people do in their 40s. So consider me co-signing, like this is what you should be doing when you're in your 40s, people. Yeah.
It's also kind of different enough from like all the other stereotypical 80s music that we've heard with like synths and a lot of the kind of the trends. I think they're kind of, it's a throwback in some ways to an earlier time of music.
I mean, it's got a crisper, like I said, it's got a crisper, this type of production I definitely associate with this time. I mean, I just know some of the stuff that Jeff Lynne did around that time, so it does bring me back to that, but it's still really good. It doesn't, I don't think that this sounds dated or anything like that. Yeah, good stuff.
All right.
Okay, moving on. I think Josh, you are next.